I think it's ever increasingly important that we, in our attempt to establish and empower folk to live in flourishing communities, I think it's important for us to underscore how powerful it is for folk to have what you and I have had when we were in Denver, what you and I have had when we were in Austin, what you and I are having right now, to have these opportunities where we sit at a common table and really have the wherewithal with mutuality, mutual respect for one another, have some very deep and profound conversations about how we could move forward into the future.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Active Towns channel. My name is John Simmerman, and that is my good friend Ronnie Harris from Gulfport, Mississippi, and the Sacred Roots organization. We're going to be talking a little bit about active mobility and how he is trying to revitalize a district right there in his hometown of Gulfport, Mississippi. It is a fabulous discussion and includes a little bit of Dutch cycling and other surprising elements. So let's get right to it with Ronnie. Ronnie, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast. Welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Ronnie, I love to give my guests just an opportunity to introduce themselves. So what's the 30-second elevator pitch as to who Ronnie Harris is?
Oh, what a great question. It begins always for me with my upbringing, my parents. I'm the son of the Mississippi soil, but was raised in Chicago. My dad, a retired city worker for the Water Reclamation Department, former 3rd Ward precinct captain. So the family business is organizing. My mom, a retired worker at the University of Chicago hospital, where she was supposed to be ultimately changing beds, but ultimately my mother is a missionary, Christian missionary by trade. So she was confused as to what her job should be, cleaning beds or talking to folks and encouraging them about hope in the future. And so that's sort of my upbringing, who I am, whether it was organizing and or caring for people. It's just in my DNA.
And I see you played some ball too.
That's right. That's right. So my younger years, like so many inner city kids, I had aspirations to go pro until I discovered that was just not in the cards for me. But I did play junior high ball and high school ball in Gulfport, Mississippi. I'm still proud of that. We were 2-time basketball champions. And you'll see number 35 there is Mahmoud Rauf, who became one of the most recognizable standout NBA greats of all time. So he was there. And in fact, I think it was 1991, 3 of the men on this young men basketball team in high school were playing on pro teams in Denver, Colorado.
Wow.
So
I'm
very, very proud of these gentlemen. We often have an opportunity to get back. The gentleman there in the Browns cap, a retired Army veteran of foreign service and war, is now our state representative. That's Mahmoud in the middle. Shahid to the far left is quite the entrepreneur and businessman, and so is the brother in the black. And so at a local level here in our small town, we are very active, as you can see, I think depicted in this picture, active to come together to see that our town is a town that is on the move, where we're really basically trying to give back to so many folk that gave so much to us during our upbringing.
Yeah. And we've got
oh my gosh.
Yeah.
That fella there, when I look at that picture, I can't help but to often think, wow, what he thought he knew. Oh my gosh. So that's 1989. I was stationed on the East-West German border in Germany, which dates me, but I don't mind. And on
which branch of service?
So that's U.S. Army.
Okay, U.S. Army.
So I was in the U.S. Army, but assigned to a pretty cool military unit that was, again, assigned to do border security on the East-West German border. one of the things I love to mention about that is I was on the East-West German border the night the wall came down.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What a memory.
Yeah. And that memory, and you characterize it that way because that memory is really etched in my mind to cement what it means to be free. Folk that know me love Ronnie. They know that Ronnie loves to talk about freedom and what it means to live a free and virtuous life. And I think it was those formative years in the military in Germany that again cemented in me what it means to be free.
Yeah, and you and I have had this conversation out on a bike ride that we're going to focus on a little bit later. But, freedom of movement and freedom of mobility is such an important thing. And just last year, I had the opportunity to attend the Velocity conference in Leipzig, Germany, and flew in and out of Berlin. Or actually, I didn't. Yeah, I did fly into Berlin. And I had the opportunity to ride my bike from the Berlin airport into downtown Berlin and be able to ride on a really nice protected and separated bike path right along the Berlin Wall. And so, boom, there you go. You've got that connection of freedom of mobility and freedom, as you're just mentioning, that memory experience, really, resonates for you. Good stuff.
It does. Very
good
deep
stuff.
Very deep.
All right, and a few years later.
Yeah, a few years later, I'm receiving a certificate of appreciation for. I was actually a junior delegate for the state of Mississippi to the Democratic National Convention. So, again, getting back to those more formative years as a child, being raised in and around communities that were civically engaged and participated in the democratic process, I ultimately, again, was fortunate to be a junior delegate, and I guess I'm being recognized for that. So
yeah. So tell me about this photo, and we'll describe it for the listening only audience. It's a photo of three very handsome gentlemen here.
Oh, Ethiopia. That's 2004. Mm-hmm. I went on, so I graduated from college and had to do an internship abroad. My undergraduate studies is in international development, and so I had to go and do some international development. And so I chose to work in Ethiopia among these two fine gentlemen, and found it to be quite a joy. Again, you'll find this theme in my life has always been about what does it mean to walk with other people to establish freedom and justice in one's lives and in communities. And working with these guys did that. They ran a youth center, and if there was any level of expertise I brought to this team, I think it was being a jokester. I think they would say
jokester. That's great. That's great.
But I learned so much. I learned so much about what does it mean to commit yourself to communities that have for generations been marginalized. As you might know, the history of Ethiopia is that they've had war and famine and things of that nature. And so I learned a lot about what does it mean to thrive for improved infrastructure and or access to the great outdoors and those things in the midst of turmoil, war, struggle, lack of funding, all of those things. Was sort of what we wrestled with while I was in Ethiopia, and I think have bled into what is my worldview today about how to enter into communities.
Yeah. Now, community engagement and being able to transform our communities into healthy, vibrant, active places is very much a part of the nexus of how our worlds came together. And that was through, of course, CityThread and the CityThread project. And CityThread, they've been focused and premiered and profiled here on the Active Towns channel in the past. I have a long relationship with Sarah and Kyle and Zoe over the years, and this is their website right here, and boom, there you go. There's a little peekaboo shot of you there. Talk about that journey of how you came to meet up with and start partnering with City Thread, and what City Thread is helping you all out with there in Gulfport.
Yeah, City Thread, and more importantly, beyond that, behind that brand is three amazing people, as you know. And um, I met them years ago on our trip to the Netherlands to be exposed to, the wonderful infrastructure that provides an added measure of mobility for local folks, and they changed my life really.
Yeah.
And
Do you know? Do you remember
since
which year that was?
I don't, but I think by name, it might have been the Big Jump.
Okay, so part of the Big Jump. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So you might have been an add-on to those 10 cities. Yeah.
That's right. And I went with Memphis, which was a city they had, worked for years in. So we maintained a relationship in part because I just wouldn't let them go. They probably think, man, this guy, this guy just won't let us go, because I was learning so much. And like you and your partners, I think being around like-minded folk that have been exposed to the impact mobility, justice, and improved infrastructure, what it can do for communities, is just contagious. And so I continue to, as the folk on the street might say, I continue to, mess with those people. City Thread is good people. They have continued to encourage me in my worldview shifts I needed to make to be a catalyst in my own community, for safe and efficient and equitable, the necessary changes we need to do in Gulfport. So when they started up, this brand City Thread, I became aware of it and thought this is something I would be a part of. Got accepted, got the city of Gulfport accepted into their program, and they came here and done a wonderful job to communicate to my city and some stakeholders in a way that I couldn't. And I think that we're better for it.
Yeah. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the team over there at City Thread, the trio, as I like to call them, they are absolutely amazing folks, and we'll pop on over and give a shout out to Zoe, Sarah, and Kyle there. And back in the day, the Big Jump project was launched announced in 2016, really launched in 2017, and then they started the study tours of bringing representatives from the 10 different cities over to the Netherlands and a couple other locations as well. I think one delegation went down to Seville to see what was going on down there. But yeah, these are actually very, very critical and pivotal moments for so many people, because it gave you that opportunity to see how mobility, active mobility, can add to that theme that we were talking about of freedom of movement and freedom of mobility. And really a big part of that is mobility choice. You have sort of you have an overlapping of mobility networks, whether it's driving a car, taking transit, walking, or biking. Those networks are there, and it's very empowering for people at all different socioeconomic levels to have that mobility options, that mobility freedom, the choice.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I agree. And yeah.
And so that then brings us to, the work that you're doing and the relevance of that work. Threads. What are you trying to do here?
Yeah. I was fortunate. I came to the bike advocacy work in 2013. I was hired by Active Transportation Alliance, Sweet Melody. You might know Melody at Active Trans. I was hired by her and Alter Planning and Design, who was in collaboration, the both of them, their organizations, with the city of Chicago to establish what are the GO campaigns. These campaigns were designed to encourage folk in neighborhoods of Chicago to walk, bike, and use public transportation. And I had, again, for most of my life, been a part of community organizing, community building, community development as a community learning and development practitioner. Like, it was what I was trained to do, it's what I have done. But to have it intersect with mobility justice happened in 2013 when I was offered an opportunity to be a liaison to my neighborhood, Bronzeville. And so I became all the more enamored by the effectiveness improved mobility has to contribute to a flourishing life for folks. Some folk are called to and have a vocation to teach. Some folk have a vocation to, feed the homeless. And those things are always understood as being part of what it's going to take to improve communities and things of that nature. But I had never given thought to what effect mobility or the lack of mobility, safe, equitable mobility has on a life. But in 2013, I became enamored by that. But funding ran out on that program. Shift in the mayor happened. But I went to the city and asked the city of Chicago, hey, give me the wherewithal to continue this program. Behavior change, which was the goal of the GO campaign, I argued to the city, doesn't happen overnight. And so they were like, oh, so we never anticipated that, one of our community liaisons would ultimately want to take the program once it was over. Because most, how it happens, a program starts, it gets funding, it meets its deliverables, and then it fades away with the funding or the lack of funding. But I thought this was significant, this was important. And so what you have in Sacred Roots is a rebrand, and more importantly, a fundamental worldview shift in me that began to understand that if I wanted to enter into communities wherever I would work moving forward from 2013, it would be in this area of mobility and mobility justice, because I fundamentally believe that is such a critical point, a critical part of what it means to help people live flourishing lives in community. A lot of times, there's all kinds of conversation about housing and transportation costs and those questions. So I've ever increasingly, under the brand Sacred Roots, in whatever city I have worked in, and I have worked in cities both here in the U.S. and continue to have relationships abroad, in communities where what I am seeking to do, what Sacred Roots is seeking to do, is to help folk be empowered to move towards human flourishing in their own given context. And one of the things I always encourage them toward is to understand the power that mobility has in establishing that in their lives. So Sacred Roots is my vehicle to enter into the world and partner with people to help them realize their potential for human flourishing. Kind of like you in Active Towns. It's my way of giving back to a world that, continues to give to me.
Yeah. A couple different themes have emerged here, and one is that connection back and forth between Chicago and Gulfport, Mississippi. And, so it's clear that you that's where the seed was planted there in 2013. And now you're back in Gulfport, doing work and growing this. Another theme that you mentioned, you'd mentioned that you were on this study tour along with the Memphis team. And this, your story sort of resonates with me along with Roshan Austin there in South Memphis and the work
Yeah,
that Roshan
yeah,
has been doing. And I had the privilege of having her profiled here on the Active Towns podcast, the audio only version. I think I need to bring her back on for the video version as
absolutely,
well. Yeah, to catch up
absolutely.
with her the great things. But she talks about the same thing, is the importance of community and housing and the strategic role that active mobility and mobility freedom and mobility choice can have. Because when we look at household affordability and the ability to flourish within one's life, being able to get around without having to support multiple cars within a household is a huge step up from a financial perspective.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's freedom on two wheels. It's freedom on feet. It's freedom on alternative modes of transportation. I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's freedom. And to mention Rochelle is spot on. She was on that trip and
Yeah, Rashawn was there.
had
Yeah,
quite a
yeah.
yeah had quite an impact on me because we were there to look at you know the bike infrastructure and mobility. However, she kept bringing it home, as she does. She kept bringing it home that what makes this matter is not that it provides folk with just a means by which to get around, but what makes this matter is what it does to afford people an opportunity to live a free and flourishing life. And she talked about the economics of Memphis and all. And it was just, it was the gospel I needed to hear on that trip, and all the more cemented in me that, hey, this mobility justice stuff is really cool. One of the illustrations of the point I often give is how powerful it is that mobility justice established in a community doesn't only make a community safer, but it makes a community more healthy, and not just more safety, not just safe and healthier, but it also makes a community far more economically viable, which is again at the very heart of what she's trying to do in Memphis. Is she's always trying to connect mobility justice to economic justice and freedom, and that sort of brings me to what I'm doing here in Gulfport, Mississippi these days. Is during COVID,
Yeah.
I moved back home to work from home and have never left. But I bought the corner store I grew up going to as a kid. Acquired the building. It's a historic building. It is where, even at the height of the Jim Crow here in South Mississippi, blacks and whites came to this store. And yet, since Hurricane Katrina, this building and this neighborhood commercial corridor has been defunct, and so I've acquired the building and a couple of lots next to it, and we're looking to establish what we have dubbed the Gulfport Gaslight District, which sits anchored between a historic white Broadmoor community and a historic black Surrey City that I call Gulfport's Harlem. So it's where I grew up. It's where my elders, my family members, one of whom is 106. He's the oldest, oldest citizen here in Gulfport. Helped build this community. But in times past, this community, it rocked and rolled. It had thriving bars and thriving restaurants and thriving, boutiques and barbershops, and you can go to markets. But today, it's a vision we have for the future and not our reality. So, but again, this all is birthed out of what does it mean to establish mobility justice and be active in community. So one of the first things I did once I got here, apart from acquiring the property, is we started a quarterly bike ride where we just took people out on bike rides in and through a neighborhood they live in, But you know as well as anyone, so few people experience their neighborhood and or their city on two wheels or on feet, right? And so our purpose was to slow things down for folk, to give them an opportunity to really make some observations into what's going on in the neighborhood. So we just took kids and their parents, whoever would come out on these quarterly bike rides, and ultimately it has become where on any given bike ride you might have even the mayor out on the ride with us. So we're going to activate neighborhood corridors and neighborhood streets that have long been not only defunct but been sort of a place where riffraff can dwell. But we're seeing that change one corner, one block, one corridor at a time.
Yeah. I'm going to pop in a photo here of Roshan just to channel her a little bit and to emphasize, yeah, that was way back in season 1, episode number 26. I'll be sure to include the link to that conversation with Roshan. She was amazing. What's great about that
Yes.
example, too, of that study tour and how impactful that was for her as well, was that she didn't even know how to ride a bike. She had to learn how to ride a bike before that study tour. It was pretty impressive.
Yeah, and rode quite gingerly while we were on the trip. I remember we would put her in the middle. We would put her in the middle of the group. Yeah, but she made it. A testament to her, courage. She's a go-getter.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to pull up, you had mentioned connections there within the community, and I want to pull up this particular photo, and you can describe it also for the listening audience too. It doesn't have the advantage of the video or the visual here. What's the story behind this particular image, and is this what I'm assuming it is part of making some of those connections?
That's right. Yeah. So I pride myself as a community organizer as being one that's grass tops as well as grassroots. And this picture, it depicts the grass top. So that's the city council. That's the mayor. That's the head of our transit, Coast Transit Authority there. There's the avid cyclists in the middle that lead so much of the effort to improve cycling infrastructure here on the coast. But then, where is he? Somewhere in the middle. Oh, right next to me is Senior Senator Roger Wicker, who is there. We're all there for a ribbon cutting for what is a bike ped tram bridge over Highway 90, which is a really, really significant development here on the Gulf Coast. There's a beautiful coastline. I think it's still the largest man-made beach in the country for sure, but I think it might be in the world. But it's got a bike trail running along it, and this bike ped tram bridge crosses over Highway 90, sort of contributing to this wonderful infrastructure along this beach. And Roger Whittaker was very instrumental in bringing home the bacon to pay for it. But yeah, it's all about making connections. What I need to say is what you know, but for the listening audiences and or those that might not be familiar with how this stuff works, that infrastructure for some folk in communities, particularly communities that are struggling, Black and brown communities, is seen as what some might call a boondoggle, a waste of money, just money thrown on a project that's just the mayor's pet project. When in fact, it is, I think, when you do the traffic counts, when you do all of the research, it's a wonderful addition to the landscape, the built environment on the Gulf Coast, and the funding stream that came together to make it happen wasn't out of local funding streams, but rather federal dollars and different other streams of funding that could make it happen. And so I am having to, as you could imagine, walk that fine line between supporting big infrastructure improvement like this that to many locals look like something built just for tourists, for an example. What I try to do, I continue to do at Go Gulfport, is to try and make the case that yes, while that can be understood from that perspective, a more broader perspective could be not only is this for tourists, but this is for us. And when you think about the health mobilities in Black and Brown communities, and the need to access the lakefront, the beachfront, we need to take advantage of it. So it's that fine line, and that's what that I think that picture depicts is Ronnie trying to be a bridge builder between my neighborhood that oftentimes feels shut out and those that are making the power decisions about what is or isn't going to happen in our city.
Well, and going back to the connection too with City Thread, and one of the main things that they do so well is helping shape the narratives and helping communities have those conversations, getting the right people in the room, and so that these conversations can happen. And there's a little bit of funding that's provided to help with technical development and that education process and facilitating it. But you just mentioned it, there in terms of the funding. You still have to go out and get other sources of funding. And so I want to pull up the ETF here and have you describe a little bit about this, because you were here in Austin not too terribly long ago. We went for a bike ride. We'll highlight a little bit about that in a little bit, but talk a little bit about this particular organization and how they are helping you in your effort to, help your community flourish.
Yeah, so one of the strange things, but the powerful things about ideas, particularly worldview changing ideas, transformative ideas, is they have consequences. And for me, whether it was going on that trip abroad with, City Thread folk, or being exposed to the work I was doing in Chicago and other cities around the world, is I then have cultivated in me this aspiration to bring this stuff home. Like, what good is it if I can't apply it here at home? So ever increasingly, I have been fortunate to be a grantee, if you will, to various different grants and educational opportunities, been exposed to world-class learning trips and things of that nature. So I'm smarter. I've got some thoughts about, like, man, what other cities that are doing these amazing things are doing. So I'm exposed. But it always comes back to, for a little black boy that has grown up to be a community advocate like myself, is how do you fund the effort? So it comes back in our society, and I think not just here in America, but around the world, is yes, but how do you fund it? The Netherlands have this amazing infrastructure. Yeah, but given our system, Ronnie, how is that going to work? How are we going to do that? How are we going to fund it? And so I left the City Thread opportunity, being one of their grantees, again, with what they call a mobility.
Oh, their mobility plan. Yeah. Their AMP, Accelerated Mobility Plan. Yeah.
That's right. So working with myself and key stakeholders here in Gulfport, Mississippi, they provided for us our mobility, our AMP, right? Accelerated Mobility Plan. But then again, I came back home with that plan, and now we have the question, how do you fund it? And that's where Equitable Transportation Fund comes in. They just met us where we were and were willing to take the risk of funding what we're trying to do, and they have for the last year. And we've seen some amazing headway that exceeded what I could have ever imagined. So it was really Equitable Transportation Fund taking a risk in me, a lead organizer here on the ground, that brought about programming that have now built a case for Gulfport, Mississippi, that now others, to include local folk, are coming to the table with a willingness to fund our project. So one of the goals the Equitable Transportation Fund had for us was to, at the very end of the grant cycle, to be prepared to, in community with some of the stakeholder partners, to be prepared to apply for what might be federal grants out there to support, transportation infrastructure improvement. Well, we're advanced that. We aren't prepared to. We've already applied, but it was them taking a risk on us. It was also to get local buy-in at the end of the grant cycle, to have built local buy-in. Not only have we built local buy-in, but we've gone right into some granting partnerships here at the very local level that is going to fund the work here into the near future. And so I will never, ever be able to communicate how wonderful it was to have a funding partner in ETF, Equitable Transportation Fund, to support the work. Being mindful of that, I need to also go back and give a shout out to one of our very good friends, Randy Newville.
Oh yeah, yes.
Who really, to a great extent, started all of this. Randy also took a risk in 2013, 14, 15 to support so much of what Ronnie Harris was wanting to do in the neighborhoods he was working in. Randy is who made it possible with his work at SRAM, who made it possible for the city of Gulfport, for an example, to even be in the City Threads AMP program. And then from the AMP program, we were introduced again to the partners at Equitable Transportation Fund and have continued the work. But it's as you know, so I'm preaching to the choir with you, but for folks that are listening and that will see or hear this later, it takes a village, for real, for things like this to happen so often. It takes meeting one person, building relationships, cultivating trust that moves into opportunities for folk that have the access and the ability to fund work to do so.
Yeah.
So partners like you come in hanging out with you in Austin.
Yeah.
ETF made that possible. That was great.
Yeah. So you guys were.
You made me cry.
Here. I did. I made you cry. We'll show that in just a moment. I've got some good video of you crying. No, I don't. But no, yeah, you were here in town in Austin, because of that ETF meeting, and we did. I've teased it enough here. So you and I had an opportunity to go for a bike ride. We talked a lot about some of those challenges to do infrastructure within communities and everything, and you can ignore that old guy in the frame there. But in back of me is this beautiful, beautiful field, and so I'm talking about how this particular high quality, all ages and abilities pathway connects. From downtown. Basically, we rode all the way from downtown out to this location on the Boggy Creek Trail. And as you can see on screen here, this is a beautiful, beautiful, a ball field. But more importantly, it's also a very historic ball field. We're talking about one of the original ball fields that was, critical in the early Black Negro leagues of baseball. I mean, this is a very, very historic and famous place. This is when you cried.
That's right. I told you that day, and even now I share the same sentiments. I don't know what got into me, but it was almost as if you can feel it. You could just. I remember I didn't know. I hadn't seen the sign. I did not know. So if I had knew the history, I could understand how I must have felt something. But you might remember we were passing it, you were describing it, but then I had to circle back and and give room for what I was feeling. And I appreciate you.
And we stopped and read
you,
the plaque. And I think that's
that's
when
right.
it really
That's right.
sunk in, was when you see the monument. Yeah, it crystallized.
Yeah, it crystallized. Because what this is the intersection between, in my mind, it was the intersection between history, historic preservation, and mobility justice, and or active transportation. Because we're on this trail. This trail is riding along this, and there it is. And you might remember me saying to you, I don't know what happened with regards to the conversations that went on to save and restore this field. I know they had to happen, but man, do I think it's cool that what the outcome was that somebody decided improved cycling, walking, pedestrian infrastructure improvement did not have to come at the cost of getting rid of this historic field. And I think why it touched me so deeply is because I think this is a model for neighborhoods and communities, cities, where we're trying to improve upon neighborhoods and communities that have been devastated by being marginalized and left behind. But we don't have to do it in such a way to where we rid ourselves of these amazing historic gems, which is what this community store is in Gulfport, Mississippi for me. It's like at the height of Jim Crow, both blacks and whites came to the store. Here I am coming in with all these ideas about transit-oriented development and equitable mobility, mobility justice, and let's improve upon bike ped infrastructure. It doesn't have to lead to some gentrification that has been dishonoring to local stories, local history, local people. It can happen in a way that understands the need to gingerly, and it takes time, it takes building relationships and trust and all that stuff. And I think that's what folk don't want to really do, is to do the hard work. Cool picture here. I'm in one of my neighbors' homes and trying to cultivate relationship by establishing some safe spaces where we can have conversations about what do we want as a neighborhood. I call these gatherings after the race. And again, I've laid out that where I'm seeking to establish development at the Gulfport Gaslight District is anchored between both a black community and a white community. So we've done separate meetings, community meetings. But what I'm articulating here, I think, is I'm showing them that there is very little difference between what the majority white folk in Broadmoor want and what the majority black folk in Surrey City want. Having met with them both, they all want to know, where are the coffers, the city's coffers, and what are the city managers, the city mayor, what are they spending it on? They all want to know, why isn't my road paved? They all want to know, how can we establish a more safe environment? And so we're going through, I have mapped out for them that there is very little difference between historic white Broadmoor and historic black Surrey City in terms of what they envision for themselves into the future. But it's going to take us being able to hold in tension the future we want and the collective history we have together. And so that's one of the things that I'm seeking to do there.
And what's interesting too, and you and I have had this conversation when we were sitting down for a beverage, and we were talking a little bit about how sometimes you get resistance from the community, and even peers within your community, and they're like, what are you doing, Ronnie? Why are you talking about this stuff? Because you kind of mentioned it earlier. It's when you're changing like the status quo, you're like, because you're not just going in and saying, let's do community vitalization and let's resurrect some businesses. You're also taking that extra step because you saw the power of mobility freedom. You're also blending in this concept of, hey, let's make it safer for people to be able to walk and bike to these meaningful destinations that we want to recreate. And so you're like almost unnecessarily adding more work for yourself because you're having to have those discussions as well, which for me is just a great illustration of how pervasive the status quo of driving motor vehicles and car culture, and Ian Walker from Wales coined the term motor normativity or car brain. It's like everybody can relate
Car
to the
brain,
fact.
I like it.
Yeah, everybody can relate to the fact that, oh, well, how much parking is going to be there? And it's just like, no. Don't focus on parking. Let's focus on people being able to get to meaningful destinations, fully knowing that the statistics across North America and most of our communities, 30 to 40% of our population are non-drivers. For whatever reason, they don't have the ability to drive. I would suspect in Gulfport, Mississippi, it's a similar percentage, if not even higher.
Yep, absolutely. Certainly is higher. And the nugget I would add to that is, and a percentage of folk that shouldn't be driving, right? I think that's the injustice of a car-centric culture is some folk can't afford it.
Right.
Some folk are other able body folk that just can't.
Yep.
And then there are some folk that just shouldn't. The people that come to mind is there's a number of folk that have had driving privileges, rightly so in some cases, taken from them. But to take one's driving privilege doesn't stop so many folk from driving. So to your point, in a car-centric culture, folk feel like I can't help but to drive. I have to drive, So the example I give is, a young fella that had got himself in some trouble in the neighborhood and had his license revoked, again, in this scenario, rightly so, let's suggest. He still drives. You say to him, well, dude, what are you doing driving? He was like, well, you want me to work, right? I was like, yeah, I want you to work. He's like, well, do you know where my job is? It's like, yeah, I know where your job is, It's like, so part of what I'm trying to do in a nutshell, by profession even for me, is instigate community-based learning, is to really have folk re-educate both themselves and others to understand the intersectionality between what does it mean to live a free life, live in a place where you can live, work, and play, and be beholding to a car-centered culture. It's at odds with one another, I'm convinced. And so these convenings we do in community is designed to do that, and not just with regard to cars, not bikes and walking, but we are also having conversations just in general about how free is our built environment, period. And so this picture here you have is in partnership with the extension program at Mississippi State University. And neighborhood folk, black and white, across the divide are coming together to discuss, what would it look like for us to begin to think about our built environment, particularly being here on the Gulf Coast, which has ever increasingly, I guess I can't say has unique challenges with regard to extreme weather, because the world over is beginning to experience extreme weather and the effects of what that means. But here on the coast, the rising sea levels and extreme weather and erosion and all kinds of things are things we really have to begin to think about as members of our community, because if we don't, there might not be a Gulfport, Mississippi in the years to come. And so many of us are having these conversations about, like, what does it mean to not just improve upon bike ped infrastructure for the sake of being able to walk somewhere or bike somewhere, but what does that do to our efforts to improve upon our environment, period? Like our commitment to carbon, like affecting, just our overall environmental responsibility to one another and to our society.
Yeah, yeah. Now, one of the things that you mentioned there is you did talk a little bit about the fear of gentrification. And so one of the biggest challenges, I think, that when we start to, talk about this concept of, hey, we're going to do something radical. We're going to encourage people to be able to walk and bike places and do that safely. Because people are walking and biking because they have to. They're, again, 30 to 40% of the population in general are non-drivers, and so they're walking. They are oftentimes in socioeconomically challenged neighborhoods. They're oftentimes walking on the sides of the road. They have a higher than normal rate of fatalities due to motor vehicle violence. And so, I want to go back to this image here of that field that we went past. So this is a map of East Austin. And so again, the I-35 that is kind of going north-south here, that was the dividing line. That was the racial dividing line, the segregation line of the city of Austin. And so anything to the east of that was, where the colored folk were. It was that's where the Hispanics and the Latinos were all shoved over there. The black population was shoved over there. You and I also had the opportunity to visit one of the Carver Museum, one of the other wonderful museums not far from the Martin Luther King transit station. And so one of the things that I wanted to point out is just how wonderfully empowering that active mobility network was for us to be able to visit these meaningful destinations, but more importantly, for people living in those neighborhoods to be able to access meaningful destinations. And it's not just about accessing the parks. I mean, the park is wonderful. And to your point, that actually was this is an active ball field. So not only did they preserve that historic ball field, but now kids from Little League are playing in it.
Reactivated it. That's
exactly. And so it's what I call an activity asset. My terminology from an active towns perspective is that's a viable activity asset. On screen here, the video that we see to the left is a community garden. And as the video continues, it connects to the Martin Luther King transit station, which then gives another layer of what we were talking about earlier, the redundancy of mobility networks as well as the integration of mobility networks. And I think that that's one of the biggest challenges. Talk through what you're doing there in Gulfport to have these conversations and reassure folks that, hey, bike lanes are not white lanes. We're not talking about trying to, shove you guys out, because that's the fear that people have, is that gentrification equals displacement. And we hope that's not what we're trying to do here.
Absolutely. And you've said nothing about the amazing housing, that's there that we're looking at in that picture. So
because we're rolling up on the station, the transit station, and this is transit-oriented development. So this will give many people the option of living a car-free lifestyle.
That's right. Yeah. So you're it's spot on. The Gulfport Gaslight District, and just in general, what I'm trying to do to influence a more flourishing community here in Gulfport is to observe, find those intersections between all of these critical components of our lives together, housing, transportation, infrastructure, economics, safety, and provide for folk a safe space to have some really meaningful dialogue and conversations about what might we be able to do together to change the status quo. And I think you've hit the nail on the head. One of the critical conversations that I continue to have with folk is this conversation around development and the extent to which it is gentrification or not. I don't like the binary that's set up there, and so one of the things I generally say for folks is, I'm actually for gentrification. I just want responsible gentrification. I want more equitable gentrification because I do want gentry, the root of the word. I do want gentry. I am in part gentry. Upward mobile, went off to college, served in the military abroad, and now I'm home. I'm gentry. I'm black gentry. But I or anyone moving into these neighborhoods have to be responsible gentry. So you spoke about like how, as a developer, yeah, it is easy to go into it. Easy. It is common for folk to go into a neighborhood and just put your plans together, put your financial packet together, and you just build something. You do something. Just lay it on people. But I have went the extra mile, and I continue to do, and I'm proud of the work that me and some of our stakeholder partners are doing to continue to do the hard work, to have the hard conversations, so that we're not just improving infrastructure here, but what we're doing is reframing the conversation, that we are transforming worldview perspectives. One friend of mine said, you can't legislate morality. I think that's true. But just the same, you actually can't build, by putting out infrastructure, better lives. I think better lives and better living, better communities are really built out of doing the hard work to address some of the long-standing gaps in our understanding of one another and of understanding what works best, what can we do, what should we do, what should we not do, and so that's what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and the alternative, of course, is, and I'm glad that you said it and framed it the way that you did about gentrification. Is that the alternative is what? We let things just continue to degrade.
That's right, to decay. That's right. That's right. We don't want that.
Yeah. So what we do want, though, is to invest in our communities, equitably, and also make sure that, as they gentrify, as they get renewed back to a vital and viable place that people want to be and human flourishing can take place. We want to do what we can to ensure that that doesn't result in displacement of people who want to be there. And so that's a very, very important point. I have your donation page here for Sacred Roots Out, because you do have the ability to receive donations. And so folks can go to the website and click on there. They can do a one-time donation. They can also do monthly donations as well. Ronnie, as we bring this to a close, is there anything that we didn't already discuss that you want to make sure to leave the audience with?
Yeah, I think it would behoove us to make a note about where we are as an American society and just a society in general on the heels of our recent elections. I was on the phone with some friends of mine from Romania who also just had a recent election. And so that's why I can say it's the world over.
Right.
That societies are being polarized, pitted one against the other. And so in closing, one of the things that I might encourage us to together, you and I, underscore is just how powerful coming together to a common table, and not a Facebook profile, by the way, not an Instagram profile, because that's just, it's a soundbite. We don't get to read each other's nonverbals. We don't get to feel each other's energy. We don't get to really begin to understand one another's story. And so I think it's ever increasingly important that we, in our attempt to establish and empower folk to live in flourishing communities, I think it's important for us to underscore how powerful it is for folk to have what you and I have had when we were in Denver, what you and I have had when we were in Austin, what you and I are having right now, to have these opportunities where we sit at a common table and really have the wherewithal, with mutuality, mutual respect for one another, have some very deep and profound conversations about how we could move forward into the future without undermining and or sacrificing the very essence of who we are. You let me start here today by talking about what's important to me, which is my family and my history and my story, and I've heard yours. And so it's that kind of stuff that I hope your listeners will never lose sight of, that no funding source, no big win, ribbon cutting of some infrastructure improvement, none of that can outweigh the what it means to have some authentic relationship and have a common table to come to and communicate with one another. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, you're quite welcome, and it's such an honor to having you on the Active Towns podcast. And I hope for everybody tuning in, either watching this on YouTube or listening to this, and also my Patreon supporters, I think you'll recognize a common theme here for those of you who do watch and listen frequently. Is I do talk about how important it is for us to engage with our neighbors, to have these conversations, and it's so important to really dialogue and get to know who is in your community, and with that you can grow a movement and you can dispel myths and disinformation that is out there. And I think that's incredibly important, and again, understanding people's backgrounds. And thank you so much, Ronnie, for sharing your story and where you have come from. And that's why I love this format. It's long form format. It's an hour-long interview, and you can't do that if you can't really share your story if we're trying to shove this into 15 minutes. So thank you to everybody who's tuning in and has done so routinely over the years to these long form interviews. It gives an opportunity to get to understand who Ronnie is, and I really do appreciate that. Ronnie Harris, thank you so much for joining me on the Active Towns podcast.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to seeing you again.
Hey, thank you all so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this episode with Ronnie Harris. And if you did, please, give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, and share it with a friend. And if you haven't done so already, be honored to have you subscribe to the channel. Just click on that subscription button down below and ring that notifications bell. And if you are enjoying this content here on the Active Towns channel, please consider supporting my efforts by becoming an Active Towns ambassador. Hey, it's easy to do. Just navigate over to activetowns.org and click on that support tab at the top of the page. And by the way, if you decide to become a Patreon supporter, you do have access to all this video content early and ad-free. So there is that added benefit. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. It really does mean so much to me. And until next time, this is John signing off by wishing you much activity, health, and happiness. Cheers. And again, sending a huge thank you out to all my Active Towns ambassadors supporting the channel on Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, YouTube Super Thanks, as well as making contributions to the nonprofit. Every little bit adds up, and it's much appreciated. Thank you all so much.